Hey everyone, welcome to Aegis Moto Adventures. In this week's episode, we're going to replace the front sprocket, rear sprocket, and chain on Sumo, a KTM 790 Adventure R. What's nice about this is most chain-driven motorcycles are all done the same way, with probably just a few little quirks along the way that differentiate them, but otherwise they'll be the same. So join us as we get started on this project. As you can see in the video here, I've got Sumo in the chock and strapped down up front there. And I've got a regular old hydraulic car lift here that I'm going to use to jack the bike up when it gets to that point. It's not quite there yet. So let's take a look at where we're at. The first thing we're going to do here is remove the chain guard, and it has two bolts here. And that piece should come off. Okay, we have the chain exposed now, and now we want to take off the sprocket guard up here, and I believe that's just on with 2 or 3 bolts as well. And on the KTM here, they're Torx. On the KTM 790, it looks like we are also going to have to take off the linkage here for the shifter to be able to slide this out. So we'll do that first, and then we'll go for the guard. There were 3 bolts that held the guard on here, and as you can see also here, this linkage, I've just pushed that up, and that allows you to pull the guard out forward here. Now if you look in here, you'll see that there's a little bit of a bent over washer, and that locks that nut in. So you'll have to straighten that out. The nice thing about this is this job is about the same on all motorcycles that are chain driven, no matter what brand they are. It's pretty similar. Now I keep the bike in neutral for this next step of the process. And here's where it helps to have a friend, and Gord helped me out here, where somebody steps on the rear brake pedal while you use either a impact wrench or a breaker bar to break this nut loose. In this particular case, I got a brand new impact wrench that's battery powered, and I broke that loose. Now I want to show you the nut here, or excuse me, washer that comes off the bike. And this washer is intended to lock the nut and keep it from vibrating loose. These are sacrificial washers. Most of the time they should be single use, but if you're able to get it off without too much damage, you can use it a second time. But if you have the opportunity to get one of these for each time you replace the front sprocket, that's a good idea. Bending the, you can see how here it's bent over just a little. Bending it and bending it back work hardens and makes the metal brittle, so it's subject to cracking. So what I'm going to do is, when I reuse this one time only, I'll spin it and use it the other way and bend over the other portion of the washer, and I should be able to get 2 uses out of this, but I won't use it more than twice. Next time I change the sprocket, I will get a new washer. I went ahead and took a little brake cleaner and cleaned the threads off here where the locking nut locks the sprocket on at. That way when I go to reassemble this, it'll have nice clean threads, no grit or dirt on it from riding the bike like we do. And I'll go ahead and make sure that that's all cleaned up, and then put probably just a little bit of blue thread locker on it. I think originally it had a little bit of thread locker on it. I have gone ahead now and just hand spun the nut back on so that keeps the old sprocket on here. And the next operation I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the back of the bike, and I'm going to use my angle grinder and grind off the one of these pins here, so that I can use a chain breaker to go ahead and break the chain and get the chain off. I have gone ahead and ground off the pins here on this particular link here, and now I'll get the chain breaker and push those out. Here I'm using the Motion Pro chain breaker tool. It'll also allow me to put the new chain together with the master link. This tool is kind of expensive, however, Just using it once pays for itself. So if you use it multiple times, you save money versus taking your bike to the shop. Okay, I have the chain broken and I've taken it from around the front sprocket. It's laying here on the floor. I had to take out one screw here for the chain guide to drop that down to give me clearance to get the chain clear of the rear sprocket. Now I can just pull the chain out and finish that portion up. I have gone ahead and put the chain in the vise here and gone ahead and pushed out the second pin. So now both ends of the chain are clean and ready for a master link if so necessary. And here's, I just used a ratchet along with the Motion Pro chain breaker tool. And here's the links and O-rings and pins that I took out. I would suggest that you hang on to your old chain because it'll tell you how long you need the new chain to be. And it's nice to have a spare around just in case sometimes you need an emergency repair. An old chain is better than no chain if you can't get one. I have encountered something interesting that I didn't realize, and I'm going to put that down here so that you can see it. But the OEM front sprocket came with a rubber padding on each side of the sprocket, and I assumed that was intended to create a dampening property to reduce vibration coming from the chain and make sure that the chain fit well on the sprocket. It's just kind of interesting. I've never come across this before. I went ahead and removed it, and the replacement sprocket is the correct sprocket, but the hole spacing here is not the same as the hole spacing on the OEM product. But I'm going to try to salvage these by cutting the little nipples off here on the rubber gasket in a few spots so that I can fit it to the new sprocket, so that when I reinstall it, I'm able to keep these rubber gaskets for dampening. I think that's kind of a nice feature. If I'd have known that, I would have got an OEM front sprocket. You might notice too that the front sprocket actually isn't worn too terribly bad. The rear sprocket is worn and definitely needs to be replaced just as a matter to make sure that nothing catastrophic happens later on, just as a routine maintenance. But the front sprocket isn't too terribly bad, and I think I will hang on to this also just in the event that I would break a tooth off, some crazy thing, and then I would have an emergency part if I needed it. After evaluating these rubber gaskets, I've decided it won't work, and the reason it won't work is because this was a molded in piece of rubber, and it needs to remain in its specific position, and if it's not in that specific position, it would probably cause problems here because they would just be loose and not functioning like they were supposed to be. So these are garbage, and I will just go with the sprocket without the rubber dampeners. I've gone ahead and installed the new front sprocket along with the lock washer and the nut, and currently right now it's just on hand tight. I will snug this up when everything gets reassembled. The next thing that needs to occur in this process is to go ahead and remove the rear wheel. If you want to know how to do that, check out episode 61 where I walk you through how to remove it. The rear wheel has been removed, and now it gives us access to the rear sprocket, and it's got 2, 4, 6 bolts that hold that on. I need to confirm that I've got the correct sprocket before I disassemble, but hopefully it's correct and we'll get that replaced here. You can notice that the rear sprocket here is really pretty well worn. It is really lobbed out here, and it looks more like shark's teeth than just a regular good sprocket. So this rear sprocket definitely needs to be replaced. It's on its last leg. Getting the rear sprocket off was a little bit tricky. I mean, it didn't take long. I had the right tools to do it. but there is a like a locking nut on the back side and then a Torx head on the front side, and these had been Loctited in, so I had to use my impact wrench with a 13 millimeter socket regular open end wrench to get to the back side to hold the nut while I impacted on the Torx. Off with the old, on with the new. The new sprocket is on. The nuts and bolts are snug, but not torqued to spec. We'll talk about that just a little bit later. But it's on there now, so I'm going to get the rear wheel back on the bike before trying to snug up the nuts on the back side of that. So the wheel is back on the bike now, and like I said, you could check that earlier episode how to remove and install the rear wheel. And now you can see that I have an issue getting a torque wrench on those nuts on the back side of the rear sprocket. And you cannot torque it using the screw because it's supposed to be torqued with the nut. So I found a solution that works, and it was really inexpensive. I think Motion Pro makes a clamp onto a regular wrench that you can use as kind of an adapter. You can buy specialty wrenches for that. But here's what I came up with. And this is called a crowfoot wrench, and it offsets it from your ratchet. And so I was able to use this crowfoot wrench to hook on here and still use my torque wrench to tighten those nuts down. And what was neat about this is I was able to get a whole set of these in metric from Harbor Freight for $13. They were running a Christmas special, so that's a pretty good deal and a good way to get around inaccessible areas sometimes using your torque wrench. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but on each nut as I torqued it down, I went ahead and put a red marker mark on it indicating that it had been torqued. Then I lifted the bike on the lift and rotated the tire and then did the next nut. So I kept doing that until I had all the nuts torqued. So that way I knew I was finished with that particular nut. The torque setting for this was surprisingly kind of low. I was surprised it wasn't higher. If I recall correctly, I believe it was 35 Newton meters or around 28 foot-pounds. What I've done here is I've lined up the old chain with the new chain. And some new chains may come bike specific, but most of them are probably shipped full length, and they'll need to be cut. Going on the premise that the old chain has stretched ever so slightly, the new chain will need to be cut right here with a stretch of about 1/4 of a link. Here you can see the stretch of the old chain versus the new chain. It's not very much at all, but they do stretch ever so slightly. The new Master Link comes with some lube for the O-rings and the Master Link pieces and 4 O-rings. A couple of things. The new chain is on the bike now. However, I did have to loosen the axle nut and slide the wheel forward in order to make it easier for me to get the Master Link in. I just didn't want to have to fight it in its current position. So I'm going to have to retension the chain to its correct tension and then go ahead and lock the axle nut down again. That just made the job easier. With the Bike Master chain that I used, as a matter of comment, and each manufacturer could be a little bit different, but here on the Master Link, these pins needed to be flared between 10 and 20 thousandths from the original diameter. And I went ahead and flared them to 15 thousandths. So I am right in the middle of the manufacturer's recommended flare for that. So that should be good to go. The best torque setting that I could find for the engine or front sprocket here nut was around 74 foot-pounds. And I even couldn't find it in the manual for some reason, but I think that's going to be pretty accurate. I still have to bend over the locking washer yet, which I will do. Let me show you though how I held it in place, why I went ahead and torqued it down. Call this what you want, but I used my floor jack here to put pressure on the rear brake to hold that rear tire from spinning while I torqued it down. Pretty funny, huh? Because I didn't have anybody to help me out. I forgot to mention also, it was specified that you should put Loctite on this, so I also put Loctite on it. So it's got Loctite torqued to 74 foot-pounds and bend over the locking washer, and then that should take care of that. Well, the guards are back on now, the linkage is back on, and this job is complete. Now it's time to jump on the bike and see how it works. Well, I hoped you liked this little garage project that I showed you in this week's video. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.